Room 114. I was driving cross-country alone somewhere in the middle of nowhere when my car started making a noise I didn't like. It was almost midnight, raining hard, and the only place to stay for miles was a motel set back from the highway with a sign that read vacancy in flickering red letters. Half the bulbs were burned out, so it really just said ACACY. I should have kept driving. I didn't. The lobby was small, lit by one buzzing fluorescent light, and the woman behind the desk was already looking at me before I even opened the door, like she'd been watching me walk up through the window. She was older, maybe 60, with grey hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and she didn't blink. Not once. Not the entire time I was checking in. I told her I needed a room for the night. She slid a paper registration card across the desk without saying a word and just stared at me while I filled it out. When I handed it back, she looked at the name I'd written and then looked up at me and said very quietly, "That's not your name." I laughed, a little nervous, and told her it absolutely was. She held my gaze for a long moment, then smiled in this stiff, unnatural way, like she was moving muscles she didn't use very often, and said, "Of course. My mistake." She gave me a key, an actual metal key on a worn plastic tag, room 114, and told me to let her know if I needed anything. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Don't open the door after midnight, even if someone knocks, even if you know their voice." I assumed she meant it as some kind of safety warning, small town stuff. I thanked her and went to find my room. The room itself was outdated but normal. Floral bedspread, boxy television, a painting of a lighthouse that was slightly crooked on the wall. I locked the door, did a quick check behind the shower curtain because that's just what you do alone in a motel room, and got ready for bed. Around 1 a.m. I woke up to a knock. 3 slow knocks on the door. I froze, remembering what the woman had said. I lay there in the dark, completely still, telling myself it was nothing, maybe another guest who got the wrong room. Then I heard a voice, my mother's voice, calling my name, soft and worried, the exact way she used to call me in for dinner as a kid. "Sweetheart, are you in there? I need you to open the door." My chest went tight. My mother had passed away 2 years earlier. I knew that voice, I knew it better than almost any other sound in the world, and it was on the other side of that door at 1 a.m. in a motel in the middle of nowhere. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the door, my whole body frozen, listening to that voice call my name 2 more times, each one a little more pleading, a little more desperate. Then it just stopped. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat upright against the headboard with the lamp on until the sun started coming up. When I went to check out in the morning, the same woman was at the desk. She looked at me and said, "You didn't open the door." It wasn't a question. I asked her how she knew, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. She said, "Because you're still here." I asked her what would have happened if I had opened it. She just looked at me for a long time, that same unnatural stillness in her face, and said, "Room 114 has had the same guest checking out early for 6 years. You're the first one who didn't leave in the middle of the night." I asked her what she meant by that. She slid my final bill across the counter and said, "Drive safe," and that was the only answer I ever got. I looked into that motel weeks later, out of some need to understand what had happened. I found an old article about a woman who had died in a car accident on the highway nearby decades ago on her way to pick up her son from college. Her son had been staying at that same motel the night it happened, waiting for her, and supposedly never left his room again after he found out. I don't know if that story is true. I don't know what I heard that night. But I know I'll never stop at a motel alone again without checking the name of the road it's on first. And I never will open a door after midnight, no matter whose voice is on the other side. My father's eyes. My dad went blind when I was 16. It happened slowly over the course of about a year. Some kind of degenerative condition the doctors never fully explained to our satisfaction. One day he could see fine, and a year later he was using a cane to find his way down the hallway of our own house, a house he'd lived in for over a decade. He adjusted better than any of us expected. He learned the layout of every room by memory. He could still cook simple meals, still recognized our voices instantly, still moved through the world with this calm confidence that made it easy to forget sometimes that he couldn't see at all. But about 2 years after he'd lost his sight completely, things started to change. It started with small things. I'd catch him standing in a room, just standing there, facing a corner like he was looking at something, except there was nothing there. My mom mentioned once that she'd found him standing at the living room window in the middle of the night, just facing outward, completely still, for almost 20 minutes before she noticed and called his name. When she asked him what he was doing, he said he was watching. A blind man, watching. We laughed it off as a strange habit, maybe muscle memory from before he lost his sight. But it kept happening more and more often, and the way he talked about it started to change too. One evening at dinner, completely unprompted, he said, "Someone's been standing at the edge of the yard again." He said it so casually, the way you'd mention the weather, and then went right on eating like nothing strange had happened. My mom asked him how he knew that, since he obviously couldn't see anyone standing anywhere. He said, "I can feel where they're looking." After that, the moments got stranger and started happening at night, specifically. I'd wake up to find my bedroom door open, even though I always kept it shut, and my dad standing in the doorway, just standing there, facing into my room, his blind eyes fixed in my direction like he was studying me. He never said anything, he'd just stand there until I said something, and only then would he turn and walk away without a word. I started locking my door at night. One night I woke up to scratching at my door, slow, deliberate, fingernails dragging against the wood in a steady rhythm. I called out, asking if it was him. There was a long pause. Then, in a voice that was definitely his, but somehow wrong, too flat, too even, he said, "Let me see you." A blind man asking to see me. I didn't open the door. I sat against it with my back pressed to the wood, my heart hammering, until I heard him walk away some time later. The next morning, he didn't remember any of it. He seemed completely normal, asked what was wrong when he saw how exhausted and shaken I looked, and had absolutely no memory of standing outside my room or saying anything at all. This kept happening for months, always at night, always the same pattern. Him standing somewhere, facing something only he could perceive, saying these unsettling things in this flat voice, then having zero memory of it the next day. My mom finally convinced him to see a specialist about it, thinking maybe it was some kind of sleep disorder layered on top of his condition. The doctor ran every test imaginable and found absolutely nothing wrong. No sleepwalking pattern, no neurological irregularities, nothing that explained any of it. The specialist did mention one strange detail, almost in passing, that I've never been able to shake. He said that during one of the overnight observations, the monitoring equipment recorded my father's eyes moving rapidly behind his closed lids for nearly 4 straight hours. The kind of movement, he said, that you'd expect from someone who could see and who was watching something move. My dad passed away 3 years ago, peacefully, in his sleep. In the days after the funeral, while we were sorting through his things, my mom found a small notebook in his nightstand drawer that none of us had known about. He'd apparently been keeping it for years, dictating notes to one of those audio recorders and having them transcribed, since he obviously couldn't write them himself. Most of the entries were mundane, daily routines, thoughts about us, but scattered throughout every few pages there was the same short entry repeated word for word. It said, "It's still standing there. It knows I can see it now." I never figured out what he meant. I don't think I want to. The last bell. I went to a small high school in a building that had been around since the 1950s, the kind of place with creaky floors and a basement nobody really used except for storage. There was a rule that had been passed down through every grade since before any of us could remember. Never be in the building after the last bell rings at 3:15 if you're alone. Nobody really knew where the rule came from. Teachers would say it like it was just a safety policy, something about liability and not wanting students wandering the halls unsupervised. But there was always this undertone to it, the way older students would say it to younger ones with this look on their face, like there was more to it that they weren't saying. I found out why during my sophomore year. I'd stayed late one Thursday to finish a project in the art room, completely losing track of time while I worked. By the time I packed up and stepped into the hallway, the building was almost entirely dark. The overhead lights set to that dim, after-hours setting that barely illuminated anything past a few feet. I checked my phone, 3:43 p.m. I started walking toward the main doors, my footsteps echoing way louder than I expected in the empty hallway. That's when I heard it, the bell, the exact same tone as the dismissal bell, ringing out clearly through the empty halls, even though school had ended almost half an hour earlier, and there was no reason for it to ring again. I stopped walking. The bell rang 3 times, the same way it always did, and then went silent. I told myself it was a glitch in the system, some kind of automated timer malfunction, and kept walking toward the exit. Then I heard footsteps, not mine, coming from somewhere down the hallway behind me, slow and deliberate, matching the rhythm of footsteps you'd expect from someone walking normally to class. I turned around, expecting to see a teacher or a janitor. The hallway was completely empty. But the footsteps kept going. I could hear them clearly, moving steadily down the hall, getting closer to where I was standing, even though there was absolutely nobody there. I bolted for the exit, didn't even think about it, just ran and didn't slow down until I was outside in the parking lot, completely out of breath, looking back at the building like it might come after me. I told a friend about it the next day, expecting her to laugh it off. Instead, her face went pale, and she told me that the exact same thing had happened to her older brother when he went to the same school years before. The bell, the footsteps in an empty hallway. He never stayed late again after that, no matter what. I asked around more after that carefully, not wanting to seem crazy. It turned out almost everyone had heard some version of the same story, passed down year after year, always involving that same after-hours bell and the sound of footsteps in an empty building. One of the older teachers, the kind who'd been there for almost 30 years, finally told me the real story after I pushed her about it one afternoon, swearing me to secrecy first. She said that decades earlier, a student had stayed late in the building alone, working on something in one of the classrooms. Nobody knew exactly what happened, but he never made it out. He was found the next morning in the hallway near the exit doors, like he'd been trying to leave but never quite made it. The official story was a medical emergency. Nothing suspicious, nothing the school wanted attached to its name. But the teacher said the custodian at the time swore he heard the dismissal bell ring that same evening, hours after the boy had died, in an empty building with the power supposedly cut off for an unrelated repair. She told me that ever since, on certain afternoons, if you're alone in that building after hours, you might hear the bell ring again. And if you do, you need to get to the exit before the footsteps catch up to you. I never stayed late again after that day, not once, not for any project, not for any reason. And every single time I walked past that building afterward, even years later, I found myself glancing at the clock just to make sure it wasn't anywhere near 3:15. The sleepover. When I was 12, my best friend was a girl named Hannah, who lived 2 streets over from me in a house that always felt a little too big for just her and her mom. Her dad wasn't around. I never asked why, and she never explained it. And I learned early on that it was one of those topics you just didn't bring up. The house had 4 bedrooms, but only 2 of them were ever used. The other 2 stayed locked, always. And Hannah told me once that her mom kept them that way because they used to belong to her older brothers, who'd moved out years before I ever met her. I slept over at Hannah's house more times than I can count growing up. It was always fun. We'd stay up too late watching movies, sneak snacks from the pantry, whisper about boys we liked at school. Her mom was strict about bedtime but easy to get around if we were quiet enough. It was a normal house, a normal friendship. Nothing about it ever felt wrong, not at first. The first time something felt off was during a sleepover in the fall when we were both 12. We were lying in her room with the lights off, half asleep, when I heard something moving in the hallway outside her door, slow dragging footsteps like someone walking with a limp, or like someone was pulling something heavy along the floor. I asked Hannah if she heard it too. She went very quiet, then she said, "That's just the house, it does that sometimes." I didn't think much of it at the time. Old houses make noise. I'd heard that 100 times from my own parents about our place. I let it go and eventually fell asleep. But it kept happening. Every single time I stayed over, at some point during the night, I'd hear those same dragging footsteps in the hallway, always slow, always deliberate. Sometimes they'd stop right outside Hannah's door, and I'd lie there frozen, waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever did. Eventually, the sound would move on, fading back down the hallway, and the house would go quiet again. I asked Hannah about it more than once over the years, and she always gave me some version of the same answer. The house was old. The floors creaked when it got cold. Her mom had mentioned something once about the pipes settling. None of the explanations ever quite fit what I was hearing, but I was a kid, and I wanted to believe her, so I did. When we were 14, things got stranger. I stayed over on a Friday night in the middle of winter. Hannah's mom had gone to bed early, and we were watching a movie on her laptop under the covers, volume low so we wouldn't get caught still being awake. Around midnight, the footsteps started again, same as always, slow and dragging down the hallway. But this time they didn't stop outside the door. This time they stopped right outside her closet. Hannah's closet door was one of those old sliding ones, the kind with a track that always stuck a little when you tried to open it. We both went completely silent, staring at it in the dark, listening as the dragging sound settled right in front of it and then just stopped. For a long moment, Nothing happened. Then we heard breathing. Slow, wet, labored breathing coming from directly behind that closet door, like something with damaged lungs was standing on the other side trying to catch its breath. I grabbed Hannah's arm so hard I probably left a mark. Neither of us moved, neither of us said a word. We just lay there, staring at that closet door, listening to that breathing continue for what felt like minutes until it finally faded away, retreating back down the hallway the same way it had come. I asked Hannah, my voice barely above a whisper, what was in that closet. She said, "Nothing, it's just old coats." But she wouldn't look at me when she said it. The next morning, I asked her again, more directly this time, while her mom was downstairs making breakfast. I asked her what was really going on in that house, why the other 2 bedrooms were always locked, why she never seemed surprised or scared by any of it the way I was. She finally told me the truth. She said her family used to have an older brother, the oldest of the 3 kids, who had some kind of severe illness as a teenager, something with his lungs, and that he had passed away in his bedroom when he was 16. Her mom never talked about it. They didn't even keep photos of him out in the house. The room he died in was one of the 2 that stayed locked. And according to Hannah, things had started happening in the house not long after he passed. Things her mom refused to discuss, but had clearly accepted as just part of living there. I asked her if her mom heard the footsteps too. Hannah said yes. She said her mom had told her once, years earlier, that her brother used to drag his oxygen tank with him whenever he walked around the house near the end, because his lungs were too weak to manage without it, and that the sound it made against the floor was unmistakable. Heavy, slow, dragging. I asked her why nobody ever talked about it or tried to do something about it. She said her mom believed he wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She thought he was just still looking for something, still trying to find his way to a room that used to be his, since the house had been remodeled slightly after he died and his exact room no longer existed in the same shape. I asked her if that's why the closet sometimes had the breathing. She didn't answer that one directly. She just said that sometimes, if you stayed quiet and didn't react, it would eventually move on and leave you alone. I stopped sleeping over after that conversation, at least for a while. I told my mom I just wanted to do sleepovers at my house instead, and she never questioned it. But Hannah and I stayed close all through high school, and I eventually started staying over again, mostly because I missed her and didn't want our friendship to suffer over something I couldn't fully explain or prove. The footsteps still happened sometimes, less often than before, but never completely gone. I got used to it, the way you get used to anything if it happens enough times. I told myself it was probably nothing. An old house with old pipes and an old story that had gotten exaggerated over the years through repetition. Then, the summer before we left for college, I stayed over one last time before we both went our separate ways. That night, the footsteps came again, same as always, slow and dragging down the hallway. But this time, for the first time in 6 years, they didn't stop at the closet. They stopped outside the bedroom we were sleeping in, and the doorknob turned, slowly, all the way, like someone testing it from the other side. Hannah sat straight up in bed, more alert than I'd ever seen her, and said in this low, urgent voice I'd never heard her use before, "Don't say anything, don't move, he's confused tonight." The knob kept turning back and forth, slow and deliberate, for almost a full minute. Then it stopped, and we heard that same labored breathing again, right on the other side of the door, closer than it had ever been before. Then a voice, faint, strained, almost childlike despite how rough it sounded. It said, "Is this my room?" Neither of us answered. We sat there frozen, holding our breath, until the breathing finally faded, the footsteps dragged away down the hallway, and the house went completely silent again. I asked Hannah the next morning if that had ever happened before. The voice, the question. She said no, never, not once in all the years it had been happening. She looked genuinely shaken for the first time since I'd known her. Like even she, who had grown up with this her entire life, had never expected him to actually try to speak. We left for college a few weeks later. I don't know if it ever happened again after that, because I never stayed over again, and we slowly lost touch the way a lot of childhood friendships do once life pulls you in different directions. But I still think about that question sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and I hear something settle or creak somewhere in the dark. Is this my room? I wonder if he ever found it. The follower. I was 17 when I started getting messages from an account I didn't recognize. It was a small thing at first, the kind of thing you brush off without thinking twice. A follow request from a private account with no profile picture, just a blank grey silhouette, and a username that was just a string of numbers and letters that didn't mean anything to me. I accepted it without thinking, the way you accept dozens of follow requests a week when you're a teenager who doesn't think much about who's actually watching. A few days later, I got a message from that same account. It said, "I like your blue jacket." I hadn't posted anything about a blue jacket. I checked my recent posts, scrolling back through weeks of photos, and there was nothing. No jacket. Nothing blue at all in any of my pictures. I figured it was some kind of bot, the kind that sends generic messages to hundreds of accounts, hoping someone responds. I ignored it and went on with my day. That evening, I wore a blue jacket to a friend's house. The same one. I hadn't thought about that message at all when I picked it out of my closet that morning. 2 days later, another message came through. "It looked good on you yesterday." I stared at that message for a long time, feeling something cold settle into my stomach that I couldn't fully explain yet. I told myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe someone at the friend's house had taken a photo and tagged me somewhere I hadn't noticed. Maybe it was a coincidence, a generic comment that happened to land on the right day by chance. I blocked the account anyway, just to be safe. A new one followed me within the hour. Same blank profile picture, different string of numbers for a username. I didn't accept it, but it didn't matter, because it could still see my public posts, and a few hours later it sent a message anyway. One that somehow made it through, despite the fact that I hadn't followed back or accepted anything. It said, "That's not very nice." I blocked that one too. Another one appeared almost immediately, then another. Each time I blocked an account, a new one would show up within minutes, always with that same blank grey silhouette, always with a message waiting for me before I'd even had a chance to do anything. I started telling myself this was some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe someone from school, bored, messing with me because they thought it was funny. I asked a few friends if they knew anything about it. Nobody did. A couple of them laughed it off, said I was probably overreacting to a bot network, the kind that exists for scamming people. Nothing personal about it at all. I wanted to believe that, I really did. Then the messages started getting more specific. One night, around 11, a message came through that said, "I can see your light is still on." My light was on. I was sitting in my room with the desk lamp on, exactly the way the message described, and my bedroom window faced the backyard, not the street, which meant whoever sent that message would have had to be standing somewhere behind my house to see it. I turned the lamp off immediately and sat in the dark, my phone shaking slightly in my hand. Another message came through less than a minute later. It said, "Better." I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against my headboard, staring at my door, waiting for something. Though I couldn't have told you what. Nothing happened. The messages stopped until the next afternoon, when a new account, same blank picture, sent me a single message that just said, "Good morning." I finally told my parents everything. My dad walked the perimeter of our house that evening, checking the yard, the fence line, anywhere someone could have been standing to see into my window. He found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone having been there, nothing disturbed in the grass. We reported it to the police anyway, who took it seriously enough to look into the accounts, but told us that with no real names attached and the way the messages bounced between throwaway profiles, there wasn't much they could trace. They suggested locking down my profile entirely, switching everything to private, blocking comments from people I didn't follow, basic precautions that probably should have happened a long time before any of this started. I did all of it. New password, fully private account, no public posts at all. The messages stopped for almost 2 weeks. I started to relax. I told myself it had finally ended, that whoever it was had lost interest or moved on to bothering someone else. Then I got a message from an account with my own username, not similar to mine, identical. Same profile picture I was using at the time, same display name, down to the small symbol I always put at the end of it. I stared at it, confused, wondering for a second if I'd somehow created a duplicate account by accident. The message said, "I made a new one since you blocked the others. Don't you like it? I think it looks just like you." I felt sick. I reported the account immediately, blocked it, and sat there trying to convince myself this was just an elaborate impersonation, something that happens to people online sometimes, nothing more sinister than that. A new message came in from yet another account a few hours later. It said, "I know which room is yours now, the one with the lamp." That was the night I finally told my parents we needed to do something more than just block accounts and hope it stopped on its own. My dad installed a camera at the back of the house, pointed directly at my window and the stretch of yard behind it, the same spot where someone would have had to stand to see my lamp. For 3 nights, nothing showed up on the footage. No movement, no shapes in the yard, just darkness and the occasional shift of branches in the wind. On the 4th night, a new message came through around 1 a.m. It said, "I don't like the camera." I called for my dad immediately, and we both went to check the footage in real time, hands shaking, half expecting to see someone standing right there in frame. There was nothing on the screen, no person, no shape, just the empty yard, exactly the same as every other night. But in the corner of the frame, barely visible, the camera's red recording light, the one that was always solid and steady, was flickering. On, off, on, off. Like something was standing directly in front of the lens, close enough to block it intermittently, even though the footage itself showed absolutely nothing there. My dad called the police again that night. They came out, looked at the footage, looked at the messages, and admitted they didn't have an explanation for the flickering light, though they suggested it might just be a hardware malfunction, a loose connection, something mundane that had nothing to do with any of this. I wanted to believe that too. We ended up moving my bedroom to a different room entirely. one that faced the front of the house instead of the back, with a window high enough that nobody outside could realistically see in. My parents installed motion sensor lights along the entire backyard, bright enough to illuminate the whole space the second anything moved. The messages slowed down after that. Not completely, but enough. Maybe one every couple of weeks instead of constant new accounts every day. Always short, always something small and unsettling enough to remind me it hadn't actually stopped. The last one I ever received, almost a year after it all started, just said, "New house, same window eventually." I never moved into a new house, not back then. But almost 2 years later, after I left for college, my parents did sell the place and move into a smaller home across town. The week after they moved in, I got a message from a blank account. It said, "Found it. I haven't gone back to visit that house at night since.